fishing pole hook, soft opening, sleep-inducing, a welcome listener. Tonight, we drift far back in time, to the banks of the slow and steady Nile. The air is warm, the river glimmers under the moonlight, and life moves without haste. We will not rush, we will not hurry. We will simply walk, step by step, into the quiet world of ancient Egypt. A world of mud brick homes, gentle rituals, simple meals, and soft voices. Close your eyes and allow this calm history to guide you into rest. This is not a tale of battles or kings, but of ordinary days lived slowly, peacefully, until sleep finds you. Tonight we drift, very slowly, into the world of ancient Egypt. The story does not hurry, it moves as calmly as the river Nile itself. Imagine the river flowing, not rushing, but moving steadily, day after day, century after century. The water carries with it not only reeds and silt, but also the gentle rhythm of daily life. You may close your eyes as you listen, because there is nothing urgent here, nothing sharp, only soft words and the quiet unfolding of history. The Nile was not simply a river. It was the breath of the land. Its waters rose and fell with a pattern that felt eternal. Each year it spread out, covering the earth with a fine layer of fertile soil. Farmers did not rush. They waited patiently, as their parents had waited and their grandparents before them. The river told them when to plant and when to rest. Its cycle was the heartbeat of their existence. As you picture this, allow yourself to breathe slowly, to imagine the calm rhythm of water touching the banks. The valley was wide but not endless. To the west and to the east, deserts stretched out in silence. The sands rolled gently, quiet and undisturbed, like an ocean that did not move. The desert was not frightening in this story. It was still, unmoving, keeping the valley safe, enclosing it in a cradle of golden silence. The people of Egypt lived between these two worlds, the flowing river and the still desert. Their lives followed both, the movement of the water and the quiet of the sand. Villages dotted the edges of the river. Small clusters of mud brick homes rested near the fertile black soil. From a distance, you would see thin lines of smoke rising slowly from cooking fires. Chickens moved quietly. A goat might bleat, then fall silent. People spoke in low voices, not because they had to, but because life was calm, and calm voices matched the day. Even in the busyness of their routines, there was no hurry. The rhythm of the river shaped their hours, and the desert air reminded them that time stretched on without end. When the sun rose, it did so slowly, painting the horizon with pale gold. The heat grew, but mornings were gentle. They did not run, they did not rush. They stepped carefully, one after another, in sandals made from reeds. The air was filled with small sounds, birds calling near the water, the soft rustle of papyrus plants swaying in the breeze. Each sound was a whisper, nothing harsh, nothing startling. At midday the sun stood high, and the land glowed with heat. Yet even then, life continued at its own measured pace. Work might pause for a meal. A simple dish of bread made from barley, perhaps with onions or fish caught from the river. The meal was not hurried. Families ate together, sometimes in silence, sometimes with soft laughter. Afterward, they rested in the shade of their homes, where the walls of mud brick kept out some of the sun's warmth. Time passed, not by clocks, but by the shadows lengthening slowly across the ground. The Nile itself had its own quiet voice. At night, when the air cooled, one could hear the water lapping gently at the shore. The river's sound was never loud. It was a continuous murmur, a reminder of constancy. For Egyptians, the river was not only a provider of food and water, it was a companion, a presence that never left. Just as you may find comfort in a familiar lullaby, they found comfort in the river's endless song. And as you imagine this, you may also feel your own breath become even, flowing gently in and out, like the Nile itself. Crops grew in ordered rows, and though farming required effort, it was not frantic. Men, women and children each had tasks, small and steady. They knew when to sow seeds, when to weed the soil, when to harvest. These moments were not marked by urgency, but by tradition, repeated year after year. The soil gave grain, the grain became bread, and bread became life. There was no surprise, only the satisfaction of knowing what tomorrow would bring. The rhythm was predictable, comforting, like the repetition of a soft phrase spoken again and again. Even the animals lived by this calm pattern. Oxen moved slowly as they pulled simple ploughs. Donkeys carried baskets with patient steps. Cats curled in corners of homes, silent protectors from mice and snakes. Dogs lay near the thresholds, watching but not restless. Every creature had a place. Every creature followed the pace of the land. Together, they made up the quiet harmony of ancient Egypt. At night, the desert sky opened wide. Stars appeared in thousands, steady and unblinking. The Milky Way stretched across the darkness like another river, a river of light mirroring the Nile below. Egyptians often looked up at the heavens, not with haste or with fear, but with wonder. They saw the stars as guides, as friends, as reminders that the world above was as eternal as the river beside them. The cool air of the desert carried silence, deep and soothing, broken only by the quiet voices of families telling stories, or by the distant cry of a bird. Then, gradually, the village fell into stillness, and sleep wrapped itself around the people as gently as the night air. Life in ancient Egypt was not about rushing toward goals or battling against time. It was about moving with the rhythm of the earth, the water, and the sky. Every sunrise was a beginning, every sunset a gentle close. In the quiet between, people worked, ate, rested, and loved, all in harmony with the natural flow. Their world was one of patience, of cycles, of calm continuity. And as you think of this, you too may feel that same continuity, a reminder that life can be simple, steady, and deeply soothing. The Nile was never in a hurry, and neither were the people who lived beside it. Its waters rose each year in a cycle that was trusted, expected, and quietly celebrated. When the river swelled during the season of inundation, the farmlands disappeared under calm sheets of water. Villagers did not panic. They knew this was life returning, soil being renewed. They watched as the land drank deeply from the flood, and they waited with patience that came from generations of experience. Nothing about this waiting was restless. It was steady, slow, filled with quiet trust in the rhythm of the earth. Along the banks, papyrus plants stood tall, their green stalks swaying gently. The breeze moved through them with a soft rustling sound, like whispers repeating a lullaby. Children played near the reeds, their laughter carried lightly across the water. But even their play did not break the stillness of the scene. It blended into it, as natural as the bird calls echoing overhead. The river accepted everything: laughter, footsteps, the steady pull of fishing nets. It carried these sounds away, leaving only calmness behind. Imagine walking beside the Nile at dawn. The ground is cool beneath your feet, and a faint mist rises from the surface of the water. Birds skim across the river, their wings brushing the air with soft movements. The horizon glows faintly with the promise of the sun, but it is not yet bright. The world feels hushed, like it is waiting. Farmers pass you on the path, carrying tools balanced on their shoulders. They nod politely, perhaps offering a quiet word, but they do not stop. Their walk is steady, unhurried, as though time itself bends to the pace of the river. The fields near the banks are simple, yet they hold the promise of life. When the waters retreat after the flood, they leave behind dark, rich soil. The farmers begin to work slowly, pressing seeds into the earth. Wheat and barley will grow here. Lentils, onions, cucumbers, and dates will follow. The work is done with patient care. A wooden plough is pulled across the field by oxen that move at their own slow pace. The farmer does not urge them to go fast. He understands that the earth does not respond to hurry. It answers only to steady, repeated care. The Nile is also a giver of fish. Fishermen cast their nets into the calm water, standing in small wooden boats that rock gently with the current. Their movements are practiced, graceful, almost like a quiet dance. They do not shout or rush. They watch the ripples carefully, reading the signs of the water. A catch is made, and there is satisfaction, but never excitement. The river provides, and in return, the people honour its steady generosity. At the end of the day, the fish are cooked slowly over glowing embers, shared among families in the same quiet rhythm that guides every meal. Beyond the riverbanks lies the desert. To someone unfamiliar, it might seem harsh and endless, but to the Egyptians, it was a shield. The vast sands stretched in both directions, protecting the fertile valley from invaders, enclosing it in safety. The desert did not move quickly. Its dunes shifted with the wind, but even that movement was slow, almost imperceptible. Travellers who crossed it moved at a patient pace, camels swaying gently under the sun. The silence of the desert was deep, endless, and strangely comforting. It reminded the people that there was a larger stillness beyond their villages, a stillness that could not be broken. Life in this valley was shaped by balance, the moving water and the unmoving sand, the green fields and the golden desert, the bright sun and the cool nights. This balance was so steady that people trusted it more than they trusted themselves. They built their days around it, and in that trust they found peace. Nothing rushed, nothing broke the pattern. Even the seasons came like soft footsteps, one after another, each blending into the next. In the evenings, families sat outside their homes to breathe the cool air after the long day of work. Children listened to elders tell stories, stories of the river's power, of the gods who guided the floods, of the stars above that seemed eternal. The words were spoken slowly with long pauses. Sometimes silence stretched between sentences, and no one minded. The silence was part of the story, part of the rhythm of life. You might imagine yourself there, sitting on a woven mat, listening to voices drift into the night air, the smell of baked bread still lingering, the stars unfolding overhead in their endless calm. And then, when night deepened, the world grew even quieter, The desert cooled, the river slowed its song, and homes darkened one by one. Sleep came not as an interruption, but as a continuation of the day's calm flow. The Nile itself seemed to sleep, its waters gliding in the moonlight. The people closed their eyes, trusting that tomorrow would arrive just as gently as today had ended, and in that trust there was deep rest. The homes of ancient Egypt were simple, yet they carried within them a rhythm of peace. They were not built for hurry, nor for grandeur in daily life. They were made from mud brick, a material shaped by the very river that nourished the land. The Nile gave silt, and that silt was pressed into bricks, left to dry under the warm Egyptian sun. These bricks did not shine or sparkle, yet they held a quiet strength. A home made of them was cool during the hot hours of the day and protective during the coolness of night. Inside, the walls were plain. There was no clutter, no endless decoration. The people of Egypt lived with what they needed and little more. In one corner, mats of woven reeds covered the floor. In another, jars of clay held water drawn fresh from the Nile. The air carried the faint earthy smell of baked mud and straw, reminding each person that their house was part of the land itself. Furniture was modest. A low wooden stool, perhaps a small chest to hold clothing, a bed made of woven rope, stretched over a frame of wood. There were no high, heavy pieces to disturb the stillness. Everything was close to the ground, simple, steady. To rest on such a bed was not to sink into luxury, but to sink into quiet. A thin linen sheet was enough to keep cool during the hot nights, and in the colder months, wool might be laid across the body. Nothing more was needed. Daily life began not with alarm or rush, but with the gentle light of dawn. The rising sun entered the doorway, and the family stirred slowly from sleep. There was no race against the clock, no clamour of urgency. The rhythm of life was guided by the natural world, the path of the sun, the flow of the river, the turning of the seasons. A mother might rise first, stepping softly across the floor. She would grind grain on a flat stone, moving her hands back and forth in a steady rhythm. The sound was low and repetitive, like a soft heartbeat. This was the making of bread, a food so simple and yet so central that it tied the family's days together. The smell of ground grain mixed with the scent of the clay jar where water was stored, and soon dough would be left to rest, waiting patiently before being baked. Children woke gradually, stretching in the dim light. Their voices were soft, their laughter gentle. They did not rush to play, but moved slowly, rubbing sleep from their eyes, sitting cross-legged on woven mats. They watched as their parents prepared food, learning without instruction, absorbing the calm repetition of daily tasks. The father, too, prepared for his work. His day was not one of noise or machinery, but of field and water. He lifted his simple tools, a hoe, a plough, perhaps a fishing net, and stepped outside, the early air still cool. His pace was unhurried. The day ahead would be long but not rushed. The land did not demand speed. It demanded constancy. Meals were shared in simplicity, baked on flat stones, onions sliced into pieces, dates plucked from tall palm trees, milk poured from clay jars. The food was plain but filling, always eaten together. There was no great feast, no hurried bites. A family sat close, passed food by hand, spoke little. Eating was not entertainment. It was nourishment, a quiet act of living. The children's tasks were gentle as well. A boy might help guide goats or cattle, his small steps echoing the steady movements of his father. A girl might carry water in a clay pot, balanced carefully on her head. These were not burdens. They were lessons in patience, in balance, in the quiet strength of repetition. Evenings were soft. When the day's work ended, families gathered once more. The air cooled, the light dimmed. Mothers mended clothing with slow, steady stitches. Fathers repaired tools, rubbing wood smooth, tying rope where it had frayed. Children listened to the rhythm of these quiet tasks, learning not through words, but through the slow example of hands that moved patiently, deliberately. And when night returned, life slowed further. Oil lamps flickered faintly. Shadows swayed against mud brick walls, voices lowered until only whispers remained. Sleep came gently, as naturally as the Nile's flow. The house, humble and still, became a cradle of rest once more. The homes of ancient Egypt were places of stillness. They were not palaces, not crowded markets, not temples filled with echoing prayers. They were simple shelters of mud brick, built with patience, standing close to the earth. And within these walls the daily rhythm of life unfolded with quiet repetition. The morning began not with noise, but with light. The rising sun spread slowly across the horizon, painting the mud brick walls with a soft glow. Birds stirred in the distance, their calls low and gentle, as if whispering the arrival of the day. Inside, families stretched upon their reed mats, their bodies adjusting to the warmth of the sun. There were no rushing sounds of wheels, no clattering of metal, no bells to disturb the calm. There was only the steady rhythm of breath, the rustle of linen, the faint crackle of fire being prepared for the morning meal. A mother, rising first, moved with deliberate quiet. Her bare feet pressed lightly against the packed earthen floor. She reached for the grinding stone, heavy yet familiar, and placed a small heap of grain upon it. Her hands began the work of pressing, sliding forward and back in an endless rhythm. The sound was steady, like a heartbeat. Not loud, not sharp, but soft and repetitive, filling the home with calm. With calm, it was the music of bread in the making. The smell of flour rose gently into the air. The children stirred, rubbing their eyes, watching without words. They knew this sound, they knew this smell, for it had been with them every morning. It was the rhythm of their lives, the quiet pattern that never changed. And in that sameness there was comfort. Every day was new, yet every day was familiar, a circle of calm that repeated with the turning of the sun. Water was poured from clay jars, the liquid cool, drawn from the river before dawn. It splashed softly into smaller vessels, each drop adding to the soothing sounds of the house. There was no hurry in these actions. A cup was filled slowly, hands were washed slowly. Even the act of drinking was quiet, the water sliding down the throat like a stream flowing gently into the earth. Outside, the father stepped into the early air. His tools rested where he had left them the evening before. A plough, a hoe, perhaps a fishing net. He lifted them with calm hands, no rush in his movements. He did not race against time, for time itself flowed differently here. The land waited patiently, the river gave steadily, the fields asked only for constancy. And so he walked without haste, his shadow stretching across the ground, joining the long line of men moving toward the fields. Inside, the mother-shaped dough into round loaves. She pressed gently, her palms folding, her fingers smoothing, her breath steady. The children helped in small ways. A little hand carried reeds to feed the fire. Another hand sprinkled flour upon the dough. Each act was small, but each was part of the whole, part of the daily pattern that gave life its rhythm. When the bread baked, its smell filled the house. Warm, earthy, rich. It mixed with the faint scent of straw from the mats, the cool dampness of stored water, the dust of the mud brick walls. It was the fragrance of home, not luxurious, not decorated, but simple and grounding. To breathe it was to feel safe. To eat it was to feel full, not only in the body, but in the spirit. The meal was plain. Bread, onions, perhaps some beans, perhaps dates from the tall palms. Sometimes milk, sometimes fish, but never in excess. The family sat close together, the food shared with hands, each piece passed slowly from one to another. There were no lavish tables, no noise of clashing cups, no endless chatter. The act of eating was quiet, slow, deliberate. Every bite chewed steadily, every swallow giving strength for the day ahead. When the meal ended, the house did not grow loud. Children went about their gentle tasks. A boy carried water in a clay jar, his steps small and careful. A girl mended a reed mat with her mother, her fingers mimicking the slow pattern of weaving. These tasks were not heavy burdens. They were lessons, lessons in patience, lessons in steadiness, lessons in the art of living without haste. As the sun climbed, the house grew warmer, shadows shortened. The walls, though simple, kept the heat at bay. Inside, the air was cool, soft, dim. Here the mother worked with quiet hands. She spun flax into thread, her fingers moving in endless circles, twisting fibres into strength. She wove linen upon a loom, her hands steady, her rhythm slow, the sound of thread slipping into place like a whisper. The children listened to this rhythm as they dozed in the shade, their bodies sinking into calm. Outside, the father worked in the fields. He bent to the earth, sowing seeds, pulling weeds, guiding the oxen through the soil. The sun burned bright, yet his pace never quickened. The work was steady, endless, but not rushed. Each row ploughed was like a breath drawn slowly in. Each row planted was like a breath released slowly out. The land did not ask for hurry, and so the man gave only patience. When the day waned, the house grew lively again, though still softly. Children returned, carrying reeds, carrying small bundles of sticks, carrying jars half filled with water. The father returned, his tools placed again in their corner, his body marked by dust and sweat, but not by complaint. Evenings were a time of gathering. The family sat close once more. The mother placed food before them. Simple as in the morning, but warm, filling, soothing. They ate slowly, speaking little, resting much. Afterward came the quiet work of night. The father repaired tools with calm hands, tying ropes, smoothing wood, sharpening edges with slow strokes. The mother stitched torn cloth, each stitch placed with care, each thread pulled gently, each motion repeated again and again. Children listened, sometimes with open eyes, sometimes half asleep. The rhythm of the needle, the rhythm of the whetstone, the rhythm of hands at work. These were lullabies as real as any song. Oil lamps flickered, casting shadows upon the walls. The flames wavered, swayed, grew tall, shrank low over and over again as though breathing with the house itself. Voices grew softer, softer still, until words faded into murmurs, and murmurs faded into silence. The mats of reeds were laid again, the beds of rope stretched again, the linen sheets pulled across tired bodies once more, and slowly, softly, calmly, the family drifted back into sleep. The home became silent, but not empty. It held within it the rhythm of the day, the steady pattern of life, the comfort of repetition. And so one day ended as countless days had ended before, and so one day began again when the sun would rise. The homes of ancient Egypt were not places of grandeur, but places of rhythm, of repetition, of rest. And in their quiet simplicity, they cradled lives as calm as the flow of the river itself. The food of ancient Egypt was simple. It was not feasts of gold, not banquets of endless dishes. It was bread, it was onions, it was beans, it was dates. And it was shared, always shared, never rushed, never wasted. The day often began with bread. The bread was round, flat, warm from the fire. It was baked upon hot stones or inside clay ovens with a steady heat. The smell drifted through the air, soft and rich, filling the home with calmness. To break bread in the morning was not only to eat, it was to begin the day with steadiness, with comfort, with something known. Alongside bread there might be onions, sharp in taste, grounding in their earthiness, sometimes beans boiled until soft, filling the stomach slowly, sometimes dates, sweet, sticky, gentle on the tongue, carrying the taste of the sun within them. Each bite was quiet, each bite was steady. There were no rushing spoons, no clattering bowls, only fingers, hands passing food from one to another, in silence or in soft whispers. Water was always near. It was drawn from the Nile before the sun grew high. It was stored in cool clay jars, their surfaces damp, their insides dark and fresh. When poured, the water flowed with a soft sound, smooth, steady, calm. It filled cups slowly and was sipped slowly, easing the body with every swallow. To drink water was not only to quench thirst, it was to share in the river's gift, the gift that never ceased, the gift that sustained all. At times there was beer, but this beer was not the strong drink of later ages. It was mild, thick, nourishing, more like bread to drink than wine to taste. It was made from grain, soaked and fermented, simple, filling, steady. Men drank it after work, women sipped it while tending the home, children tasted it watered down. It was not for laughter, not for noise, but for calm, for strength, for balance. The midday meal was never heavy. It was often bread again, perhaps fish from the river, perhaps figs gathered from trees. The fish was grilled upon coals, its skin crackling softly, its flesh tender, its smell drifting gently across the breeze. There was no rush to eat. A man chewed slowly, his eyes resting on the fields. A woman chewed slowly, her hands resting from work. Children chewed slowly, their voices quiet, their laughter muted to whispers. The meal was a pause, not a performance. It was a moment of stillness. As the sun burned high above, evening brought the largest meal, though still plain, still calm. Again, there was bread. Always bread. Always bread. It was the heart of the meal, the centre of life, the comfort in every day. Alongside it were lentils, stewed until soft, flavoured with herbs, fragrant yet gentle. There were cucumbers, fresh and cool, their crunch soft between the teeth. There were dates again, sweet, golden, almost like dessert, though not in excess. Sometimes honey, golden and thick, was drizzled upon bread, a rare gift, a sweetness savoured slowly. Families sat close when they ate. They sat on mats of reeds cross-legged, their hands moving gently toward the shared food. No one had more than another, no one rushed ahead. Pieces of bread were torn, dipped, passed, offered. Children were fed by their mothers, men shared bites with their wives, brothers passed food to sisters. It was a circle of calmness, where food was not only eaten but shared with care. The sounds of eating were soft. Eating was soft. The crunch of a cucumber, the tearing of bread, the quiet slurp of stew, the gentle gulp of water. Each sound was part of the music of the home, never loud, never rushed, always steady. After the meal there was rest. Children leaned upon their mothers, eyes heavy, bellies full. Fathers leaned back, hands on their knees, breath slow, shoulders easing. The house dimmed, the lamps flickered, and the quiet weight of fullness spread through the room. It was not the fullness of luxury, but the fullness of enough, enough to be satisfied, enough to be still, enough to close the eyes and feel safe. Food in ancient Egypt was not about plenty. It was about rhythm. It was about the steady return of bread, the quiet sweetness of dates, the cooling sip of water, the nourishing spoon of beans. It was about repetition, about knowing that what sustained one day would sustain the next. It was about trust. Trust in the land, trust in the river, trust in the hands that made and shared the meal. And so with every bite the people of Egypt found calmness, and so with every meal they found rest. And so with every day they moved one step further through life, gently, slowly, quietly, always sustained. The food of ancient Egypt was simple, always simple. It was not crowded with spices from far-off lands, not covered in heavy sauces, not a banquet of endless courses. It was quiet food, food that grew close to home, food that came from the earth and the river, the sky and the sun. And because it was simple, it was steady. And because it was steady, it was calming. And because it was calming, it made life itself quiet, gentle, and soft. Every morning, bread was baked. The bread was the centre, always the centre, always the... It was made from barley, sometimes from emor wheat, sometimes from both. Grains were pounded in stone mortars. The sound was rhythmic. Thump, 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 thump. The hands of women pressed the pestle into the grain. The grain broke, the husk separated, the flour grew. And the flour was mixed with water, cool water drawn from a clay jar, fresh and still. Salt was stirred in, sometimes herbs, sometimes dates to sweeten. The dough was shaped by hand, pressed flat, rounded, placed upon hot stones or inside clay ovens. And when it baked, the smell filled the air. The smell filled the air. It was a smell both sharp and soft, the smell of comfort, the smell of life itself. To eat bread was to be steady. To break bread was to feel safe. It was not luxury, but it was enough. Every day began with bread, and every day ended with bread. The people of Egypt knew that if bread was present, life would continue calm and assured. Sometimes, alongside the bread, there were onions. Onions were strong, sharp, grounding. They grew easily in soil damp with river water. They were pulled from the ground, washed, cut, eaten raw, eaten cooked. They gave energy to workers in the fields, soldiers on the road, builders at the quarries. Their taste was harsh, but their strength was steady. Even in their sharpness, there was calm, because to chew an onion was to know the land had provided. Beans, too, filled the meals. They were boiled in clay pots, softened over steady flames, flavoured with herbs. They were eaten slowly, spoon by spoon, filling the belly without weight, without rush. The sound of beans cooking was a low bubbling, a soft hiss of steam, a background hum in the quiet home. It was not a loud sound, but a steady one, a comforting one. It reminded the family that food was near, that rest would come, that the day would end with fullness. Dates were sweeter. Dates carried the warmth of the sun, the richness of the palm tree. They were sticky, soft, golden brown. Children loved them. Elders cherished them. They were eaten fresh, plucked from clusters, or dried, stored for months, held for times of need. Their sweetness was not overwhelming. It was gentle, slow, melting on the tongue, calming the body. A date at the end of the meal was not only food. It was a promise that sweetness always followed labour, that rest always followed effort. Water was present, always. The Nile gave water, and water gave life. It was drawn in jars, cool to the touch, porous clay keeping the inside fresh. When poured, water made a soft, steady sound, trickling, flowing, calming. When drunk, it was swallowed in slow gulps, cooling the throat, easing the body. There was nothing richer than water, nothing more calming than its stillness. To drink water in the heat of Egypt was to feel reborn, to feel safe again, to feel whole. Sometimes, instead of water, there was beer. Egyptian beer was thick, cloudy, nourishing. It was not a drink of noise, not a drink of laughter, not a drink of stumbling feet. It was bread made liquid. It was grains softened, soaked, fermented, poured. It gave strength to workers, gave calm to families, gave steadiness to the body. A man would drink beer after labour, slowly, not in haste. A woman would sip beer as she cooked, quietly, steadily. Ooh. Children were given watered-down beer, gentle, safe, nourishing. The beer of Egypt was not for forgetting. It was for steadying. It was for quiet meals, for quiet lives. At midday, food was light. Bread again, always bread. Perhaps a cucumber, fresh and cool, its skin crisp, its flesh watery, refreshing. Perhaps a fig, soft, sweet, gentle. Perhaps fish, caught from the river, grilled upon coals, its skin crackling, its meat tender. The air would fill with the smell of smoke, the soft hiss of fish flesh on fire, the calm drift of scent across the home. People would eat slowly, shaded from the sun, resting between labours. The midday meal was not a feast. It was a pause. It was a breath. It was a breath. It was a way of telling the body, you have done enough. Rest for a while. In the evening, the meal was larger. Not grand, not endless, but larger. There was bread, torn in circles, dipped into stews. There were lentils, boiled soft, flavoured with coriander or garlic. There were vegetables, leeks, radishes, lettuce, all fresh, all gentle. Sometimes meat, but not often. A small bird, a piece of goose, a bit of beef for festivals. Most nights, it was only plants, grains, beans, dates, honey, and in their plainness there was peace. The body was filled without heaviness. The spirit was calmed without excess. The night arrived not with noise, but with steady fullness. Families ate together, always together, on reed mats, seated cross-legged, with bowls shared in the centre. There were no knives clattering, no forks scraping, no plates piled high. There were hands tearing bread. There were fingers dipping stew. There were mothers feeding children, fathers offering bites, siblings sharing. It was not about what one person ate. It was about what all shared. The meal was not only food, it was family, it was unity, it was calm. The sounds of eating were gentle. The crack of bread, the crunch of cucumber, the soft slurp of stew, the quiet sip of water. Each sound was steady, calm, a rhythm of peace. When the home was filled with these sounds, life was full. When the home was filled with these sounds, there was no need for more. After eating, stillness followed. Children grew heavy-eyed, leaning on mothers, yawning softly. Fathers leaned back, hands on their knees, bellies warm, eyes closing. The lamps flickered, shadows stretched. The air grew cool. The family sat in silence, breathing, resting, waiting for sleep. The meal was done, and calm had returned. Food in Egypt was never only about food. It was about rhythm. Bread every morning, bread every night, dates at the end of the day. Water at every pause. It was about trust. Trust that the land would give. Trust that the river would flow. Trust that the sun would rise again, warming the crops, ripening the fruit, filling the jars. It was about calmness. Calmness in chewing, calmness in swallowing, calmness in sitting together, sharing, repeating, day after day. And so, food was life, and life was calm, and calmness was everything. The people of Egypt ate not for noise, not for show, but for steadiness, for quietness, for the gentle passing of time. And in their meals, in their quiet meals, they found rest. Clothing in ancient Egypt was not loud. It was not heavy. It was not crowded with layers. It was light. It was simple. It was the land was hot. The sun was strong. The days were long. And so the people dressed in cloth that cooled them, in cloth that let the air move, in cloth that gave comfort. Most often, that cloth was linen, always linen. Soft, white linen, spun from the stalks of flax that grew in the fertile soil close to the river, close to life. The growing of flax was slow. Seeds were pressed into wet soil. The stalks grew tall, green, slender, shimmering in the sun. When they were ready, they were pulled, not cut. They were bundled, laid in water, softened by the river. The stalks grew loose, the fibres freed. Then hands worked them gently, patiently. The fibres were beaten, combed, stretched, spun into thread. The spinning wheel turned slowly. The thread wound steady and thin, endless and soft. And from thread came cloth, and from cloth came peace. The linen was white, always white, the colour of light, the colour of the Nile's reflection, the colour of calm. It could be plain, or it could be pleated, folded in long lines, creased with care. Men wore kilts, wrapped at the waist, simple, steady, tied with cords. Women wore long dresses, flowing to the ankles, held by straps, soft on the skin, cool in the heat. Children wore little, sometimes nothing, only a small piece of cloth, only what was needed. Clothing was not for show. It was for calm, it was for comfort, it was for life. On special days there were more details. jewellery of beads of faience of glassy blue stone, bracelets at the wrists, necklaces at the throat, simple not heavy, colourful but calm, the shimmer of turquoise, the glow of carnelian, the soft shine of gold, not loud, not vast, but soft, steady, glowing in the sun. Crafts, too, were quiet. The work of the hands, steady and patient. Pottery spun on wheels, clay shaped by wet fingers, lifted into smooth bowls, jars, cups. The wheel turned slowly, round and round, steady, hypnotic. The hands pressed lightly, evenly, gently. The vessel rose hollow and calm. The clay dried in the sun, hardened in the kiln, glowing with warmth. Paint was brushed on in slow strokes, red, black, white, lines of lotus, lines of reeds, the shapes of birds, the marks of life. Woodworkers carved. The sound was soft, steady. Chisel against wood, tap by tap, shaving by shaving. A box was formed, a chair, a bed. Not crowded, not loud, the shapes were simple, the lines smooth, the edges soft. To sit on a chair, to lie on a bed, was to feel calm. The craft was not for decoration only. It was for comfort, for daily use, for the stillness of life. Weavers worked in silence. The loom stood tall, threads stretched like the strings of a harp. One by one, the shuttle moved back and forth, the cloth slowly forming. The rhythm was gentle, endless, soothing. It could take days, weeks, months, but there was no rush, there was no hurry. The craft itself was calm, and so the cloth itself carried calmness. Even in metalwork, there was quiet. Bronze hammered into tools. Copper shaped into knives, chisels, needles. Not loud, not grand, but steady, useful. Each tap of the hammer was a rhythm. Each spark was a moment of light. The craftsman's breath was slow, his work unbroken, his patience endless. In the homes of Egypt, clothing and crafts surrounded life. The soft linen on the body, the smooth clay jars by the wall, the woven baskets holding grain, the carved wooden stools, the jewellery that caught the light of the sun. All simple, all steady, all calming. To live among these things was not to be crowded. It was to be surrounded by balance. The balance of work and rest. The balance of need and beauty. The balance of simplicity and care. And when the day was over, when the body was tired, when the home grew quiet, these crafts, the cloth, the jars, the chairs, the beds, held the family in comfort. The linen cooled their skin. The jars kept their water fresh. The beds supported their bodies. The crafts gave calm, and calm gave sleep. The clothing of ancient Egypt was gentle. It was soft. It was simple. It was calm. It was not crowded with colours, not weighed down with heavy fabric. It was light and airy, made for a land of sun and sand. Every thread was born from patience, from the earth, from the river. Linen was the gift of the land, and linen was the fabric of life. The people planted flax by the river. They placed the seeds in the damp soil, and the Nile fed them. The stalks grew green and tall. When the time was right, hands pulled the stalks from the ground, not cut, but pulled to keep the fibres long and strong. The stalks were gathered, tied in bundles, and laid in the water. Days passed, the fibres softened. The water seeped through, loosening what was hard, freeing what was hidden. Then came the gentle beating, the careful combing, the careful combing. Strand by strand, the fibres were drawn out, smooth and fine, ready to be spun. The spinning was slow. The wheel turned. The thread stretched. It was thin, it was steady, it was endless. The spinner's hands worked without hurry. Hours could pass, days could pass, and still the wheel turned, and still the thread wound on. Out of nothing but patience, cloth was born. Linen, always linen, soft, cool, white. The cloth was cut and shaped into kilts for men. Simple strips, wrapped at the waist, tied, folded, pleated. Women wore dresses that fell to their ankles, held with straps, clinging lightly, never heavy. The cloth breathed, it let air pass. It soothed the skin. Children wore little or nothing, only when needed. The hot sun allowed them freedom. The calmness of clothing was not broken by many colours. The linen was almost always white, shining like the reflection of the river, soft like the moonlight. Sometimes it was pleated with care. Sometimes it was decorated with beads, but mostly it remained plain. Plainness was enough. On special days, jewellery was worn. The necklaces of faience beads glowing in blue and green, the bracelets of small stones shining in the light, the rings of carnelian, the amulets of turquoise, the gleam of soft gold. Not heavy, not crowded, but balanced. Each piece was chosen with care, not to dazzle but to steady, not to overwhelm but to calm. The jewellery was quiet beauty, a whisper rather than a shout. Crafts too filled daily life with quietness. The potter sat by the wheel. The clay was wet, soft, waiting to be shaped. The wheel turned slowly, round and round. The hands pressed lightly. The vessel rose, its sides smooth, its body round. It grew taller with each turn, steadier with each touch. When the shape was done, it was set to dry, warmed by the sun, then hardened in the fire. The pottery came out strong, ready to hold water, ready to store grain. Painted lines of lotus and reeds gave it life. The patterns were not loud. They were simple, repeating, calm. Woodworkers also worked with patience. The chisel tapped softly, not rushed, never forceful. A stool was made, a box, a bed. The shapes were square and steady, the lines smooth. They made furniture for homes, tools for work, toys for children. The wood carried the memory of the tree, but in the hands of the craftsman, it became calm, useful, balanced. To sit on a wooden chair was not only comfort, it was the feeling of being supported by the earth itself. Weavers worked with looms. The vertical threads were pulled tight, stretched, waiting. The shuttle moved back and forth, carrying the horizontal threads. The rhythm was steady, the sound soft. The cloth grew slowly, one line at a time. It could take weeks, even months, but time was not the enemy. Time was the companion. The loom stood tall, the cloth fell long, and the weaver's hands never stopped. The weaving itself was as calming as the cloth it made. There were also crafts in metal. Bronze was shaped into tools. Copper was hammered into chisels, knives, small ornaments. The hammer struck the surface again and again, not too hard, not too soft, a steady rhythm like a heartbeat. Sparks lit the air, small flashes, soon gone. The work was quiet strength. It gave tools that lasted. It gave blades that cut. It gave needles that stitched. All were made for daily life, for simple use, for calm purpose. In every home, crafts were present. The jars that held water stood by the wall. The baskets, woven from reeds, carried grain. The chairs, carved from wood, waited for rest. The beds, tied with cord and covered with linen, held the tired body through the night. The jewellery hung in small boxes, waiting for festivals. The clothing folded neatly, waiting for the next day. Nothing was wasted, nothing was wasted, nothing was too much. Everything had a place, and everything gave balance. When the day ended, when work was done, when the sun slipped behind the horizon, the crafts surrounded the family in quietness. The cool linen touched their skin. The jars held water to drink before sleep. The wooden beds cradled their weight. The soft light of an oil lamp flickered across the jewellery, across the pottery, across the woven mats. It was not loud. It was not busy. It was calm. Clothing gave comfort. Crafts gave order. Together they made life simple. Together they gave the people of Egypt a steady peace. The rhythm of weaving, the turning of the wheel, the tapping of the chisel, all of these were the background music of life. Gentle, steady, endless. Day after day the same actions repeated. Seeds planted, flax pulled, thread spun, cloth woven, clay shaped, wood carved, metal hammered. Day after day the same things returned, and yet they never lost meaning, they never lost calmness. The repetition itself was soothing, the slowness was life, and so the people of Egypt lived among these quiet things. Their bodies clothed in soft linen, their homes filled with crafted objects. Their hands always working, always making, always shaping, but never in haste. Their world was built not on noise, but on stillness, and in that stillness they found balance. In that balance they found rest. In that rest they found sleep. Beliefs in ancient Egypt were gentle. They were deep, but not hurried. They were woven into the rhythm of daily life, like the rising and setting of the sun. To the people, the gods were never far away. They were in the light of dawn, in the calm of the river, in the steady turning of the seasons. Belief was not a matter of sudden thought. It was a steady presence, flowing as calmly as the Nile. The sun rose each morning, and with it rose Ra, the great sun god. His light stretched across the land, warming the fields, awakening the birds, awakening the birds. People lifted their eyes to the first glow of light and whispered thanks. It was not loud. It was not grand. It was simple gratitude, as soft as the morning air. To see the sun rise was to know that life continued. To know Ra had crossed the sky once more was to feel secure. Other gods were near to, secure. Other gods were near to. Isis, the mother who comforted, who healed, who guarded children with quiet strength. Osiris, the god of the afterlife, who promised that death was not the end but only a doorway to peace. Horus, with the eyes of the falcon watching from above, strong yet steady. Thoth, the keeper of wisdom, calm with every stroke of his pen. Each god held a place, each god carried a part of life, and together they formed a balance. The temples were not always filled with noise. More often, they were filled with silence. The wide stone halls echoed with footsteps. The air was cool. The light entered softly, touching the carved walls. On those walls, figures of gods stood still, painted with gentle colours, lined with care. A priest moved slowly, his linen robe trailing across the stone floor. He carried water from the river. He carried incense that burned with sweet smoke. He carried bread, he carried flowers, he carried offerings of calm devotion. The rituals were never rushed. At dawn, doors were opened. The statue of the god was bathed, clothed in clean linen, given food and drink. Words were spoken, but softly. The smoke of incense rose, curling gently, fading into the air. The people outside the temple knew it was being done, even if they could not see. They trusted that the priests were tending to the gods, as surely as they tended to the earth. Festivals came too, but even festivals were part of the slow rhythm. Boats glided on the Nile, carrying statues of gods from one temple to another. Music played, but it was steady, repeating. Drums beat like heartbeats. Sistrums shook with a soft rattle. People gathered, walking slowly, singing in unison. The sound was less like shouting, more like a chant. It carried through the air like a lullaby, echoing across the riverbanks. Death itself was not an end, but a passage. To die was to journey to Osiris. The body was wrapped in linen, layer upon layer, slow and careful. Amulets were placed between the folds, small scarabs, tiny charms, symbols of protection. The work of wrapping could take many days, but each day was calm. Each layer was a prayer. Each band of cloth was a promise that the soul would not walk alone. The journey after death was described in gentle images. The soul sailed in a boat across waters as still as night. It came to a hall where Osiris waited, where the scales stood ready, On one side, the heart of the person was placed. On the other, a feather, the feather of Maat, goddess of truth, goddess of balance. If the heart was light, if the heart was pure, it balanced with the feather. If so, the soul walked on into eternal fields of calm. Fields where the Nile never failed, where crops grew endlessly, where shade and water were always near. This belief soothed the living. To know that life was not a sudden end but a slow continuation made each day gentler. To believe that Osiris waited not with anger but with fairness made each choice steadier. To see Maat's feather as the measure of the soul was to be reminded that truth and balance were enough. Children learned of the gods not with fear but with stories. Mothers told them how Isis searched for Osiris, how she found him, how her love gave him life again. Fathers told them of Horus, who watched from the skies, steady as the falcon's eye. Grandparents reminded them that Rust's journey across the sky was the same every day, never failing, never hurried. These stories were told by firelight in calm voices like bedtime tales. They were not only lessons, they were comfort. Every field, every home, every street carried signs of belief. Amulets hung at doorways, small shrines stood in corners. Offerings of bread and water were left, not in great ceremony, but in quiet habit. A cup of water for a wandering spirit, a loaf of bread for a passing god. The act itself was soothing. It reminded the people that they were not alone. Belief was not apart from life. It was life. It was in the planting of seeds, the rising of the sun, the filling of jars, the folding of linen. Every act could be ritual. Every moment could be sacred. To work with balance, to live with order, to sleep with peace, this was to honour the gods. And so, in Egypt, beliefs were not a burden. They were not heavy on the heart. They were as light as the feather of Maat. They were as steady as the turning of the sun. They were as calming as the flow of the Nile. They gave meaning without noise. They gave comfort without demand. In the silence of the temple, in the stillness of the night, in the rhythm of the day, the gods were always near. The people did not need to call loudly. They did not need to rush. They only needed to live slowly, gently, calmly. And in that calmness, belief lived on. Belief in ancient Egypt was never hurried. It was never a matter of sudden excitement, nor was it a burden to carry heavily. It flowed as quietly as the river Nile, steady and calm, touching every part of daily life. To an Egyptian, belief was not something apart from the world. It was the world. It was the world. It was in the air they breathed, in the water they drank, in the earth they sowed, and in the light that touched their faces each morning. It was gentle. It was constant. It was soothing. Each dawn, as the faintest glow touched the horizon, the people knew Ra was awakening. The sun was not simply a star in the sky. It was Ra himself, the great shining one, rising once again. To watch the soft golden light spread over the fields was to feel his warmth on the skin, his care in the crops, his strength in the river. There was no rush in this rising. The first beams always came slowly, as if the world itself was still stretching in sleep. Egyptians watched in silence, sometimes whispering thanks, sometimes simply gazing, content in the rhythm. Ra had crossed the night safely, steering his boat through darkness, and now he returned, bringing light. That was enough to feel safe. Other gods walked quietly in their lives too. Isis, the mother, the healer, the comforter, was always near. Mothers whispered her name while nursing babies, hoping for her tenderness to guard their children. Isis was imagined not with thunder, not with overwhelming power, but with patience and gentle hands. Osiris, her husband, brought calmness about death. He was not feared but trusted. He promised that the journey beyond life was not harsh, but peaceful, like stepping from one quiet room into another. Horus, with falcon eyes, soared above as a protector. His watchful gaze was a shield, a calm assurance. Thoth, with his careful writing, stood for wisdom, the kind of wisdom that arrives slowly, with each word written, with each thought considered. And then Mart, perhaps the most soothing of all, was balance itself. She was the feather against which all hearts would be weighed. She reminded people that to live gently, truthfully, with fairness was enough. Temples rose across the land, but they were not places of constant noise. They were places of stillness. Walking into a temple meant stepping into cool stone halls where shadows lingered and shafts of light touched the painted walls. The figures carved there did not move, yet they seemed alive in their calm presence. Priests moved slowly, their steps echoing softly on the floors. They wore linen robes, light and clean, their movements measured as if time itself was slower inside those walls. Each morning the ritual began. The god's statue resting in the sanctuary was awakened. The doors were opened carefully, as if not to disturb the air. The image of the god was bathed with water from the Nile, water that reflected the same sunlight Ra had given. The statue was clothed in fresh linen, smooth and white. Incense was lit, and the smoke curled upward, carrying prayers without words. Bread was placed, beer was poured, flowers were laid down. These offerings were not loud gestures. They were small, steady acts, performed again and again, day after day, year after year. It was the rhythm that mattered, not the grandeur. Outside the temples, people went about their daily lives, but always with belief woven in. At home, small shrines stood in corners. A bowl of water, a piece of bread, a simple amulet were enough to honour a god. Farmers paused before the fields, lifting their eyes to Ra. Fishermen touched the water, murmuring thanks to Happy, the spirit of the Nile. Children wore charms shaped like scarabs, or the eye of Horus, gifts from their parents to keep them safe. These were not heavy acts of devotion. They were light, woven into the fabric of life. Festivals came in their seasons, gentle and repeating, just like the flooding of the river. On those days, statues of gods were placed on boats, gliding along the Nile, carried by the current as people followed along the banks. The river shimmered in the sunlight, the boats moved slowly, and the chants of the people rose softly. The sound of drums pulsed steadily like a heartbeat. Sistrums rattled lightly, a sound like wind in reeds. Songs were sung, but in unison, repeating phrases again and again, like a lullaby carried over water. The festival was not frenzy, it was a procession, slow, deliberate, soothing to watch, soothing to join. When death came, there was sadness, but there was also peace. Egyptians did not see death as a sudden end. They saw it as a continuation, a journey onward. The body was prepared with great care, wrapped slowly, layer by layer, in linen. Each fold was a pause. Each amulet placed between the wrappings was a prayer. Scarabs for protection, eyes for vision, knots for safety, feathers for truth. The process took days, but it was never rushed. It was a way of guiding the soul gently forward, giving comfort even in departure. The journey after death was told as if it were a dream. The soul travelled by boat, drifting through calm, starry waters. It reached the hall of Osiris, where silence reigned. There, the scales waited. On one side lay the heart, on the other the feather of Maat. The weighing was not harsh. It was calm, simple. If the heart was light, if it was free of heavy guilt, the soul was welcomed. Then came the eternal fields, the field of reeds, where crops grew endlessly, where the Nile's waters never failed, where there was always food, always shade, always rest. This picture of eternity was not frightening. It was comforting, like a promise of an endless, gentle harvest. At night, families gathered, and stories of the gods were told in quiet voices. Mothers told children how Isis searched for Osiris, how her love brought him life again. Fathers told of Horus watching from the sky, guarding them like the falcon's gaze. Grandparents told of Ray's daily journey, his boat sailing across the heavens, unfailing, steady. these stories were not just myths. They were bedtime tales, soft, reassuring, spoken so that children would drift into dreams with gods protecting them. Belief was not separated from life. It was life itself. Planting a seed was an act of hope in rice warmth. Pouring water was a gift from happy. Truth in dealings was an offering to mate. A quiet prayer at night was a link to Isis's comfort. Every act, no matter how small, could be sacred. To live fairly, to live fairly, to live calmly, to live in harmony with the river, the fields, and the sky, this was religion. And so, Egyptian beliefs did not weigh heavily. They did not frighten, they soothed, they gave order, meaning and peace. They flowed like the Nile, steady and slow. They rose like the sun, gentle and warm. They were as light as a feather, as calm as the evening breeze, as steady as the endless cycle of day and night. When the temple stood in silence, when the incense drifted upward, when the chants echoed softly, the people felt the gods close. They did not shout to be heard. They did not rush to be seen. They simply lived in rhythm. And in that rhythm, in that quiet balance, belief lived forever. The Nile flowed slow and unhurried, like a great living breath moving through the land. Its waters carried silt, its floods carried life, its presence carried peace. Along its banks, the people of Egypt worked, but their work too followed the same rhythm, steady, patient, never rushed. Each task was tied to the river, each day guided by its waters. To live was to work with the Nile, not against it. When the floods receded, dark soil remained. The earth was softer, damp and fertile. Farmers stepped barefoot into the fields, feeling the cool mud between their toes. They carried wooden ploughs, drawn gently by oxen. The plough scratched the surface, turning the soil. There was no loud sound here, only the creak of wood, the shuffle of animals, and the soft splash of feet in the earth. Seeds were scattered by hand, grain falling like quiet rain upon the ground. Each seed was a hope, each gesture an act of trust in the river's gift. The sun rose slowly, warming their backs as they worked. Men, women and children all shared the labour, but it never felt harsh. The fields stretched out, golden in time, swaying gently in the breeze. At midday they paused beneath shade, breaking bread, drinking cool water, resting while the river shimmered nearby. The air was still, except for the quiet hum of insects and the calls of birds circling above. Work, rest, and work again. All moved in cycles as calm as the Nile's own flow. Harvest time brought quiet joy. Sickles made of flint cut the stalks, and the grain was gathered slowly, tied into bundles. Donkeys carried the loads back to the granaries. There, workers poured the grain into storage jars, sealing them carefully, knowing this harvest would feed not only families but the whole community. The rhythm of harvesting was almost like a song. Cut, gather, tie, carry, store, repeated gently until the fields were bare. Yet there was no sadness in the emptiness. They knew the river would flood again. They knew the soil would renew. It was a cycle, eternal, soothing. Not all work was in the fields. Some sat in the cool shade of temple walls, holding red pens. These were the scribes. With ink made from soot and ochre, they dipped their pens into palettes, and on sheets of papyrus they wrote. Line after line, symbol after symbol, flowing with care. Hieroglyphs were not just marks. They were living pictures, carrying the sound of words, the memory of names, the order of trade, the records of harvests. A scribe's day was quiet. The scratching of the pen against papyrus, the soft murmuring of reading aloud, the rhythm of words flowing, it was all slow, deliberate, like meditation. They wrote of taxes collected, of grain stored, of offerings given. They wrote prayers, poems, hymns, letters. Each word was a way of shaping order, of keeping life steady. Farmers gave life through food, and scribes gave life through memory. Both labours were needed, both honoured, both part of the same calm balance. By the river's edge, fishermen lowered nets into the water, watching ripples spread out slowly. Sometimes they stood in silence for hours, waiting, knowing the Nile gave it its own pace. When the nets lifted, fish gleamed silver in the sun, flapping gently before being laid in baskets. Nearby, potters shaped clay, their wheels spinning slowly, their hands smoothing wet earth into jars, bowls and lamps. Craftsmen carved stone, their chisels tapping in patient rhythm, while weavers worked at looms, threads moving back and forth, weaving linen as fine as breath. Every type of work was tied to the river, either directly or through the rhythm it gave to time. Even rest was shaped by it. At evening, when the sun sank and Ras light softened, the workers walked home along the river banks. The air cooled, the fields darkened, and the Nile glowed faintly in the fading light. Families gathered at doorways, meals were shared, stories told. Tomorrow would bring more work, but tomorrow would come gently, just as the Nile returned each year, furrowed each year. In Egypt, to work was not to fight against the world, but to join it. Farmers moved with the flood, scribes moved with the words, fishermen moved with the current, potters moved with the clay, weavers moved with the thread. Life was labour, but it was labour in rhythm, like a soft song sung endlessly, soothing to perform, soothing to remember. The Nile moved, always moving, yet never hurried. Its water flowed like a breath stretched across the land. On its banks, people worked. They worked not with noise, not with haste, but with patience. Their labour was woven into the rhythm of the river, into the rising and falling of its waters, into the turning of seasons. To live in Egypt was to live with the Nile, to move with it, to rest with it, to rise and sleep by its gentle pulse. Morning began softly. Morning began softly. The sun rose slowly over the eastern horizon, spreading a glow of gold, and rose across the fields. Farmers stepped out of their homes, their feet touching the cool earth, still moist from the night. The fields stretched far, dark soil rich and ready. The Nile had given its flood, and now the ground waited to be shaped. Oxen stood patiently, wooden ploughs at their sides. The farmers grasped the plough handles, guiding the animals forward. The sound was soft, wood creaking, soil turning, water seeping back into the ground. Step by step, furrow by furrow, the fields opened, slow and steady. Seeds were carried in baskets, small and light, and scattered by hand. The motion was gentle, a sweep of the arm, the quiet fall of grain like raindrops across the earth. Children sometimes followed, pressing seeds into the soil with their toes, laughing softly, though even laughter here seemed muted, wrapped in the calm of morning. Each seed was placed with care, with trust that the river's gift would turn it into food. The day warmed. The sun grew stronger, but the work remained steady, never rushed. The farmers bent to pull weeds, to guide water through small channels, dug by hand. Irrigation flowed in trickles, the water glistening in sunlight, moving slowly through the channels, feeding each patch of soil. The air carried the sound of insects humming, birds circling overhead, oxen snorting quietly as they worked. When the sun reached its height, the workers paused. Beneath shade, of palm trees, of small shelters, they sat. Bread was broken, dates were shared, water was sipped slowly. The meal was simple, but it was enough. Around them, the fields shimmered in heat, but their rest was calm, their voices low, their movements unhurried. After rest, they rose again, and the cycle continued. Season by season, task by task, their work flowed like the river itself. In flood season, they waited. In sowing season, they planted. In harvest season, they reaped. Each part of the year had its rhythm, predictable, eternal, soothing. Harvest time carried a quiet joy. Sickles of wood with flint edges cut through the stalks. The sound was a soft whisper of stems breaking, bundle after bundle tied and carried. Donkeys walked slowly, their hooves pressing into the earth, carrying the loads to storage. Granaries filled with grain, jars sealed with care. Work songs were sometimes hummed, but even songs were low and steady, more like breathing than music. While farmers worked the land, others worked with words. In shaded rooms, scribes sat at low tables, red pens in hand. Papyrus sheets lay before them, smooth and pale. Ink made from soot and ochre rested in small palettes. Dip, draw, write, each stroke careful, each line precise. The scratch of pen against papyrus was soft, rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. Scribes wrote lists of grain, records of trade, taxes collected, offerings made. They wrote letters, contracts, prayers. Each symbol was more than a mark. It was a picture, a thought, a sound captured in stillness. To write was to give permanence, to hold memory. A scribe's day was quiet, filled with concentration, each moment flowing into the next. They read aloud softly, lips moving, voices low, repeating the words like chants. Writing itself was a ritual, a calm devotion to order. Beyond the fields and the writing tables, other labours unfolded along the Nile. Fishermen stood at the water's edge, nets in hand. They lowered them slowly into the current, waiting, always waiting. The river gave in its own time. Sometimes they waited in silence for hours, the only sound the ripple of water against the boat, the gentle splash of fish below. When the nets were pulled, silver bodies flashed in the sun, wriggling softly before being placed into baskets. It was never rushed. Patience brought reward. Potters shaped clay dug from the riverbanks. At their wheels the clay turned slowly, spinning beneath steady hands. Fingers pressed gently, smoothing, shaping, coaxing the earth into jars, bowls and lamps. The wheel spun, the hands moved, the form appeared. It was a quiet creation, as if time itself slowed to watch. Weavers sat at looms, threads stretched taut, back and forth, Back and forth they moved the shuttle. Linen grew thread by thread, line by line, soft and fine, light as breath. Their hands moved steadily, without hurry, their minds calm, their work flowing like water. Stonecutters carved blocks for temples and homes, their chisels tapping in measured rhythm. Tap, pause, tap again, never hurried, always precise. Each strike was small, but each added up, shaping great walls, great statues, great monuments. Builders carried the stone, set it in place, smoothed the joints, aligned the corners. The work was heavy, but it was done slowly, carefully, without haste. Every kind of labour was tied to the Nile's rhythm. Farmers depended on its floods. Scribes recorded its gifts. Fishermen drew life from its waters. Potters used its clay. Weavers grew flax along its banks. Stonecutters transported blocks by boat along its current. The river was at the heart of everything. Its steady flow mirrored in the steady work of the people. Evening came gently. The sun lowered, casting long shadows across the fields, soft light reflecting on the river's surface. Workers walked home, their steps unhurried, tools carried over shoulders, baskets balanced carefully. Smoke rose from hearths as meals were prepared. Families gathered, eating together, speaking quietly, telling stories of the day. Children listened, eyes heavy with sleep, drifting as their parents' voices murmured like the flow of the Nile outside. Night fell cool and still. The river glimmered under starlight, dark and endless. Work had ended, but it would begin again, just as the river would flow again, just as the sun would rise again. Life was a circle, work a rhythm, time an endless song. And within that circle, within that rhythm, there was peace. In Egypt, to work was not to struggle against the world, but to join it, the world, but to join it. Farmers joined the soil. Scribes joined the word. Fishermen joined the current. Potters joined the clay. Weavers joined the thread. Builders joined the stone. Each role, each task, each day was part of a larger whole, part of the balance kept by the Nile. The river flowed, and with it flowed life. Work was not harsh. Work was not hurried. Work was a calm devotion, a steady offering, a patient rhythm. Along the Nile, work was life, and life was peace. The river stretched wide and calm, carrying boats like leaves drifting upon a breeze. Travel in Egypt did not hurry, it flowed. The Nile was the road, and the road was smooth, winding northward, southward, as steady as breath. Along its waters, people moved. Traders, messengers, families, all of them glided upon the current. Their journeys were not rushed, they were part of the river's endless rhythm. Wooden boats rested upon the surface, sails raised to catch the soft winds. When the breeze blew from the north, sails filled and pushed the craft gently upriver. When the current ran down, oars dipped into the water, slow and steady, one stroke after another. The sound of wood meeting water was calm, a repeated hush, a repeated sigh. Journeys did not race. They unfolded, long and even, like the passing of a song. Travellers carried goods with them. Jars of wine, baskets of grain, rolls of linen, bundles of papyrus, and small trinkets made by hand. Each item was carefully packed, carefully ranged so nothing broke along the way. Donkeys carried loads upon land, their hooves striking the dirt with soft rhythm. Along desert roads, caravans moved, line after line of patient animals, guided by traders in simple robes. Bells tied around their necks jingled faintly, keeping time with each step. Trade was never only about goods. It was about connection. Villages exchanged what they had for what they lacked. A fisherman might trade his catch for woven cloth. A potter might exchange jars for baskets of dates. At markets near the riverbanks, people gathered. Voices were quiet, but steady, bargaining, greeting, sharing news. The air carried the scent of baked bread, dried fish, crushed herbs. Shade was made with cloth stretched upon poles, offering rest to both sellers and buyers. Longer journeys carried traders beyond Egypt's borders. Across desert paths, caravans brought incense from distant lands, ebony from the south, lapis from far-off mountains. Boats returned with cedar wood, copper, and spices. Yet even these distant trades followed the same rhythm. Slow, steady, patient. There was no rush. There was only the road, the boat, the path beneath the sun and stars. At night, travellers rested. Caravans stopped, building small fires that flickered against the vast desert sky. Meals were simple, shared in silence, before sleep took them under the soft blanket of night. On the river, boats were tied along banks, sails lowered, their crews lying upon mats beneath the open sky. The water lapped against the wood, steady, steady, like a heartbeat. Stars glimmered above, endless and still, as journeys paused until dawn returned. Trade and travel were part of life's circle. Goods moved, people moved, stories moved. The Nile carried more than boats, it carried connections. Villages touched villages, cities touched cities, Egypt touched other lands, slowly, calmly, endlessly. To move along the Nile was not to rush toward a destination, but to float within a rhythm that was larger than oneself. Journeys were not measured by speed, but by steadiness. The river taught patience, and in that patience, peace. The river was always there. It did not hurry, it did not stop. It stretched and wound through the land of Egypt, carrying the lives of those who lived beside it. To travel along the Nile was to enter into its rhythm, a rhythm that moved like breathing, slow, steady, endless. Boats sat upon the water, some large, some small, their wooden sides creaking softly as they drifted. White sails lifted, catching the wind. Oars dipped into the current, pulling the boats forward one slow stroke at a time. The sound was always gentle, wood against water, a repeated hush, like the whisper of sleep. Travel was not a rush. There was no sense of haste. A boat might take days, weeks even, to reach its destination. But no one counted the hours. They counted the rising and falling of the sun. They counted the meals shared along the way. They counted the stops at riverbanks, where travellers stretched their limbs and rested beneath the shade of palm trees. The river was a path, but it was also a companion. It guided, it carried, and it set the pace. And the pace was calm, Along the water, traders moved with their goods. There were baskets of grain tied with rope, jars of wine sealed with clay, rolls of linen wrapped tight, bundles of papyrus stacked neatly. Fishermen carried their catch, tilapia, perch, catfish, each one caught with patience from the same river that carried the boats. Potters sent jars and bowls, carpenters sent carved stools and boxes, weavers sent soft cloth, dyed in muted colours. Everything had weight, and yet everything was carried lightly upon the water. The Nile bore it all. Beyond the river, caravans moved across the desert. The desert was wide, the sky above it endless, but the caravans were steady. Donkeys and camels carried loads upon their backs, sacks of dates, bundles of reeds, jars of oil, rolls of woven mats. Their hooves struck the ground in patient rhythm. Step, 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 step. The sound did not change. It was as steady as a heartbeat. Traders walked beside them, robes brushing the sand, staffs in hand. Sometimes they spoke. More often they walked in silence, letting the desert surround them with its vast, still air. Bells tied around the animals' necks jingled softly, a sound that carried across the emptiness, keeping pace with each step. There was no rush. There was only the journey, long and even. When caravans stopped, they found rest. At an oasis, water reflected the sky, and palm trees gave shade. The animals drank slowly, dipping their mouths into the water. Traders lowered their packs, unrolled mats, and shared food. Dates, bread, dried fish, perhaps a handful of figs. They ate without hurry, and when they finished, they lay back upon the earth, watching the sky, letting the warmth of the sun sink into their bones. Night would come, and with it the stars. The desert sky was clear, sharp, filled with thousands of shining points. The traders lay beneath them, their fires glowing faintly, and they slept. Tomorrow would bring more walking, more steps, more patience. But for now, there was stillness. The markets were the meeting place of travel and trade. Villages and towns along the river held gatherings where people brought what they had, offering it to those who needed it. The market was not a place of noise and rush. It was a place of gentle exchange. A fisherman might trade a basket of fish for a roll of cloth. A potter might give jars in exchange for grain. Voices rose, but they rose softly, calm, and measured. Bargains were made with a nod, a word, a hand extended in agreement. Children played at the edges of the market, chasing one another slowly through the dust. The air was filled with simple scents: baked bread, dried herbs, fresh fruit. Cloth was stretched above stalls to give shade. People moved beneath it, unhurried, their conversations drifting like the wind. Trade was more than exchange. It was connection. It was one village touching another, one person sharing with another, a rhythm of giving and receiving. Longer journeys stretched farther still. Egyptians sailed beyond their own land, sending ships across the sea to distant coasts. To the north, they found cedar wood in the hills of Lebanon. To the south, they found ebony, ivory, and gold in Nubia. To the east, they sailed to the land of Punt, bringing back incense, myrrh, and spices. These journeys were long, but they were no less calm. Ships carried their crews across the waves. Sails filled, ropes creaked, waves lapped against the wooden hull. Days stretched into nights and nights into days, but still the ship moved forward, steady and patient. The sea was vast, but the sailors trusted the rhythm of water and wind. They guided their course by the stars, watching Orion rise, watching the North Star remain fixed above them. Their eyes followed the heavens, and their hearts followed the rhythm of time. At night, wherever travellers rested, upon the river, upon the desert, upon the sea, there was quiet. On the river banks, boats tied with rope rested gently, their crews lying upon mats. The water lapped against the wood, soft and regular, carrying them into sleep. On desert roads, caravans stopped, fires flickered, animals rested in the sand. Traders lay wrapped in cloaks, staring at the stars until their eyes closed. On the sea, sailors stretched upon deck, listening to the waves beat against the sides of their ship, one after another, endless and soothing. The world was large, but the world was quiet. Travel was not only for trade. It was also for pilgrimage, for visits to family, for the simple act of moving from one place to another. Priests might travel to temples, carrying offerings. Families might journey to festivals, bringing gifts and food. Messengers carried words rolled upon papyrus, sealed with clay. Oh. Donkeys carried loads upon land, their hooves striking the dirt with soft rhythm. Along desert roads, caravans moved, line after line of patient animals, guided by traders in simple robes. Bells tied around their necks jingled faintly, keeping time with each step. Trade was never only about goods. It was about connection. Villages exchanged what they had for what they lacked. A fisherman might trade his catch for woven cloth. A potter might exchange jars for baskets of dates. At markets near the riverbanks, people gathered. Voices were quiet, but steady, bargaining, greeting, sharing news. Fring news. The air carried the scent of baked bread, dried fish, crushed herbs. Shade was made with cloth stretched upon poles, offering rest to both sellers and buyers. Longer journeys carried traders beyond Egypt's borders. Across desert paths, caravans brought incense from distant lands, ebony from the south, lapis from far-off mountains. Boats returned with cedar wood, copper and spices. Yet even these distant trades followed the same rhythm, slow, steady, patient. There was no rush. There was only the road, the boat, the path beneath the sun and stars. At night, travellers rested. Caravans stopped, building small fires that flickered against the vast desert sky. Meals were simple, shared in silence, before sleep took them under the soft blanket of night. On the river, boats were tied along banks, sails lowered, their crews lying upon mats beneath the open sky. The water lapped against the wood, steady, steady like a heartbeat. Stars glimmered above, endless and still as journeys paused until dawn returned. Trade and travel were part of life's circle. Goods moved, people moved, stories moved. The Nile carried more than boats. It carried connections. Villages touched villages. Cities touched cities. Egypt touched other lands, slowly, calmly, endless. Homes in ancient Egypt were simple, and in their simplicity, they carried a deep sense of calm. They were built from mud brick, shaped by hand, sun-dried, and stacked one upon another. The walls were thick, keeping out the heat of the day and holding in the coolness of night. Roofs were flat, open to the sky, and families often climbed them in the evening, sitting together in the gentle air, letting the stars above slowly appear one by one. Inside, the rooms were not crowded with things. A mat laid upon the floor served as a place to rest. A low stool, carved from wood, gave a seat. A simple chest might hold clothes, or a few precious items, wrapped in linen. The spaces were uncluttered, open, and quiet. In this stillness, one could hear the soft sounds of daily life. A pot placed upon the floor, the brush of linen cloth, the murmur of voices speaking low. Meals were shared upon the floor. Bread was broken by hand. Jars of beer were poured into small cups. Fish and vegetables were set in bowls of clay. There was no rush. Eating was a slow act, one bite at a time, with pauses in between. Children laughed softly, reaching for fruit. Parents smiled, offering food with gentle hands. The home was a place where the world slowed, where time itself seemed to linger. At night, lamps burned with oil, their flames small and steady. Shadows moved along the walls, stretching long, then fading. The light was never bright, only soft. It invited quiet. It invited rest. Families sat together in the glow, speaking in low tones until sleep drew near. The homes of ancient Egypt stood quietly along the banks of the Nile, small in size, humble in shape, yet full of a peace that was woven into the rhythm of life itself. These homes were not built for grandeur, but for comfort, for shade, for stillness. The walls were made of mud brick, pressed by hand, baked in the sun, stacked one over another. Their colours were soft, the brown of earth, the pale beige of sand, sometimes washed in white lime to catch the light of the sun. When one looked upon the village from a distance, it was as though the land itself had risen up to form shelter, as if the earth wished to cradle the people in its arms. Inside, The homes were simple, uncluttered, and calm. There was space to breathe, space to move slowly, space to sit and rest. Furniture was sparse, a wooden stool here, a woven mat there, a jar of water set carefully in the corner. Each object had its place, each thing belonged, and nothing felt crowded. To enter such a home was to step into quiet. One could hear the faint sound of wind against the walls, or the laughter of children playing outside, or the low hum of voices carrying from a neighbouring house. Daily comfort in these homes did not come from luxury, but from routine, from repetition, from the steady flow of ordinary acts. In the morning, the family rose with the light. Doors were opened to the sun, letting in its warmth. Mothers ground grain into flour, their hands moving in slow circles, the sound of stone against stone steady and rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. Children fetched water from nearby wells or from jars filled at the river, carrying it back carefully, step by step, balancing each drop. Fathers tended to small repairs, mending a roof mat, smoothing a mud brick wall, fixing a basket. These tasks were done without hurry. They were not burdens, but parts of life, woven into the stillness of each day. Meals were taken together, not in silence, but in gentle calm. Bread, baked in outdoor ovens, was brought inside warm and fragrant. Fish, caught from the river, was grilled slowly, its scent filling the air. Vegetables, lentils, onions, cucumbers, leeks, were laid out in bowls, their colours bright against the earthen tableware. Beer, brewed thick and nourishing, was poured into small clay cups. These meals were not feasts, but steady, quiet gatherings, moments of connection. Parents offered food to children. Children shared bites with one another. Voices rose in conversation, not loud, but steady, weaving together stories of the day. Comfort was also found in small things. A cool jar of water placed beside the mat in the heat of noon. The touch of smooth linen against the skin, woven soft from flax. A necklace of simple beads, worn not for wealth but for beauty. A carved wooden figure of a protective god set in the corner of the room, its presence a silent reassurance. These were not luxuries, but gentle companions of daily life. At night, the homes changed with the coming of darkness. Lamps were lit, small clay vessels filled with oil, a wick burning slowly. The light they gave was dim, flickering, steady but soft. Shadows moved upon the walls, bending, stretching, retreating. Children lay upon mats, heads resting against woven pillows, listening to the murmur of voices, the sound of stories told in low tones. Mothers and fathers spoke of the gods, of the river, of the stars. The rhythm of speech, the pause between words, the repetition of familiar tales, all these carry the mind gently toward rest. On rooftops, families often gathered beneath the open sky. The air was cooler there, the stars shone clear. The Nile glistened faintly in the distance, carrying its slow waters under the moon. Some lay back upon mats, looking upward, watching constellations form shapes. A falcon, a lion, a boat. Children asked questions, and parents answered, weaving calm stories of how the gods placed stars to guide the people. How each one was a lamp in the heavens, watching over the earth. Slowly, with the night air wrapping them in stillness, sleep came soft as linen, deep as the river. The homes themselves were more than shelter. They were places of safety, of belonging, of rhythm. Their walls echoed with the same sounds year after year. Footsteps, laughter, whispers, the grinding of grain, the clinking of jars, the murmur of evening talk. Their floors felt the same touch, the bare feet of children, the resting steps of elders, the soft fall of woven mats. The air within them carried the same scents, fresh bread, burning oil, dried herbs, cool river water. In their simplicity, they held everything a person needed to feel whole. Beyond the family, comfort was also found in neighbours, in community. Homes stood close together, walls side by side, doors opening into narrow lanes. People passed by one another each day, exchanging greetings, sharing food, lending tools, helping with repairs. In the evenings, women gathered to grind grain together, their movements synchronized, their songs low and steady. Men returned from fields or workshops, carrying baskets resting their shoulders, speaking of the river, the weather, the harvest. Children played between houses, chasing one another, laughing until called back inside. Festivals brought even greater comfort to homes. On holy days, homes were decorated with fresh flowers, garlands of green, bowls filled with dates, figs or pomegranates. Families dressed in their best linen, lighting extra lamps, preparing special meals. Priests' chants carried through the air from temples, and people brought offerings home, placing them before small household shrines. These festivals did not only belong to the great temples, They belonged to the people, to their homes, to their daily comfort. Even in times of hardship, when the river ran low or when illness touched a family, the home remained a place of refuge, its walls sheltered, its mats comforted, its shadows calmed. Amulets were worn, prayers were spoken, incense was burned in corners to ward away harm. The people trusted that just as the river always returned, life too would flow again, and the home would remain steady. In this way, the homes of ancient Egypt were not only physical spaces, but living, breathing rhythms of peace. They reminded the people that comfort was not in abundance, but in simplicity, not in noise, but in quiet, not in fleeting luxuries, but in steady routines, in the touch of linen, the sound of grinding grain, the glow of an oil lamp, the voices of family close by. Each detail, each moment, wove together into a long lullaby, the lullaby of home, soft, soothing, endless, carrying the people of Egypt gently through their days and gently into their nights. Entertainment in ancient Egypt was never rushed, never noisy in the way we might imagine. It was gentle, slow, and woven into the fabric of ordinary life, like the river Nile itself, flowing endlessly and calmly. The people of Egypt found joy in simple pleasures, in moments of stillness, and in activities that carried no urgency, only rhythm. Music was one of their softest forms of leisure. Small harps were plucked gently, their strings producing tones that lingered in the air like the fading light of dusk. Flutes, carved from reeds along the riverbanks, let out smooth, breathy notes, almost like whispers of the wind. Drums, struck not loudly but steadily, echoed like a heartbeat in the background. Families gathered around such music in the evenings. Children leaned against their parents, listening. Elders closed their eyes, letting the sound settle in their thoughts. Music did not excite them to noise, it calmed them, eased them, lulled them like the rocking of a boat upon gentle waters. Games, too, were part of this gentle leisure. The most famous was Senet, a board game played with carved pieces and painted squares. It was not played with hurry or tension, but with patience. Each move carried meaning, each throw of the sticks was accepted with calm. Children learned the game slowly, sitting with their parents, moving the pieces one by one, watching, waiting. Laughter came, but it was soft laughter, warm and shared. To play Senet was not to compete harshly, but to pass time together, to let the hours drift gently away. Storytelling was another form of entertainment, perhaps the most soothing of all. As the oil lamps flickered, elders spoke in quiet tones, recounting tales of gods, kings, animals, and dreams. Children listened wide-eyed, their minds drifting between waking and sleep. Although these stories were not hurried, they were told with pauses, with repetition, with gentle rhythm, like waves against the shore. Some spoke of Ra's journey across the sky, others of Osiris and the afterlife, still others of clever animals who taught lessons in their adventures. The stories were not only entertainment, they were comfort, wrapping listeners in the security of familiar words. Festivals, too, carried a softness within them. Though temples were filled with chants and processions, within the homes and villages the joy of festivals was expressed in quiet gatherings. People prepared small feasts, danced slowly to drum beats, clapped hands in simple rhythm. Children painted their faces with lines of colour, laughed together, and then sat back against walls, tired but calm, watching the lamps glow. Even in celebration, the Egyptian heart leaned toward gentleness, toward balance, toward quiet happiness. There was also leisure found in nature itself. Families strolled along the riverbank, barefoot upon the sand, listening to the rippling of the Nile. Fishermen, when their work was done, sometimes sat quietly by the water, watching the reflections of clouds pass by. Children played with small red boats, placing them gently upon the water, watching them drift away, not racing them, but simply observing their slow journey. Such pastimes were small, but they carried deep calm, turning ordinary afternoons into moments of quiet joy. Even animals became part of gentle entertainment. Cats, cherished companions, were stroked and admired as they curled upon laps, purring softly. Dogs played in courtyards, wagging their tails as children laughed. Birds were kept in cages or allowed to flutter freely, their songs filling the still air. The people of Egypt found delight in watching animals, in feeding them, in simply being near them. Their presence made homes warmer, their company eased the flow of the day. Tantu. And so entertainment in ancient Egypt was never about noise, nor about grand spectacle. It was about passing time together, about finding rhythm in games, softness in music, wonder in stories, and calm in the presence of others. These moments wove themselves into the days and nights, soothing the people, reminding them that leisure did not need to be loud to bring joy. It only needed to be gentle. Entertainment in ancient Egypt was never hurried, never wild, never meant to overwhelm the senses. It was gentle, soft, and unhurried, the kind of leisure that blended naturally into the rhythm of life. Just as the Nile flowed steadily without rushing, so too did the moments of joy and pastimes of the people. They found happiness not in noise or excitement, but in balance, in calm gathering, and in the quiet rituals of everyday leisure. When the work of the day was done, when the fields were left behind in the glow of dusk, people would return to their villages, their homes, and their courtyards. Here, the evenings stretched slowly. The air was cooler, the sun softened into a golden haze, and voices lowered to a calm murmur. This was the time when Egyptians allowed themselves leisure, not to escape life, but to be more deeply part of it. Their entertainment soothed rather than stirred, it calmed rather than excited, and it lingered like the faint perfume of incense in the temple air. Music was among the most common of these gentle pleasures. Harps with smooth wooden frames were strung with gut chords, plucked slowly, each note ringing soft and hollow in the stillness of the night. The tones did not rush into one another, but rose, lingered, and faded into silence. Flutes, carved from reeds along the Nile's edge, carried breathy, whisper-like melodies, soft enough to sound like the river wind itself. Simple drums kept steady rhythms, like a heartbeat, drowning the music in a pulse that was felt as much as heard. Families sat close, perhaps sharing a quiet meal or sipping cool water, while a harpist strummed gently and a flutist leaned into the night air. No one shouted, no one rushed. Music in Egypt was never about noise, it was about balance. The musicians themselves seemed part of the silence, allowing the sound to soothe instead of overwhelm. In grander homes, entertainers might be invited to play, but even there, the tone was soft. The lute-like instruments were played with slow plucks. The sistrum, a rattle-like sacred instrument, was shaken lightly, and small groups sang in low harmony. The words often praised the gods, or spoke of the Nile's endless generosity, or carried blessings for the household. Children sat cross-legged on the floor, leaning against their mothers, slowly nodding off as the music blended with the hum of insects and the gentle crackle of lamps. It was not performance in the way we might imagine today. It was closer to a lullaby for the whole community. Games were another form of quiet entertainment. The most famous was Senet, a board game played on a grid of 30 squares. The game was deeply symbolic, thought to reflect the journey of the soul. But beyond its meaning, it was simply a pastime, a way to let the evening pass. Players moved carved pieces, often shaped like small cones or animals, across the painted squares. They cast sticks instead of dice, counting the number of marked sides to see how far to move. Each turn was slow. Each move was thoughtful. There was no rush. Laughter came, but it was soft laughter. A father explained the rules patiently to his child. A mother watched her children take turns. An elder shared stories of the game's meanings. Hours slipped away gently as pieces moved across the board. Children had their own amusements too. They played with dolls carved from wood or shaped from clay, simple figures dressed in scraps of linen. They made little red boats and set them upon pools or at the river's edge, watching them float slowly, bobbing upon the surface. The boats were not raced. They were watched, gently nudged, and followed with calm eyes. Some children played with balls made of cloth or reeds, tossing them softly back and forth, never with force, but with playful, careful care. Even their play reflected the Egyptian rhythm, slow, deliberate, balanced. Storytelling was perhaps the most soothing entertainment of all. In the flickering light of oil lamps, elders would sit and speak, their voices low, their tone steady, their words carrying both memory and magic. Stories of gods and goddesses, of the sun god Ra sailing his bark across the sky, of Osiris ruling the afterlife, of Isis and her endless devotion, of Set with his chaos, of Horus the falcon, bright-eyed and watchful. These tales filled the air, not rushed, not hurried, not worried, but stretched across the night like the stars across the heavens. Children listened with wide eyes, leaning against their parents. Adults listened too, nodding in agreement, feeling the wisdom carried in the rhythm of repeated words. Each story was not just entertainment, but a meditation, a calming reminder of the order of the world. Even myths of battles between gods were told with a slow cadence, with pauses, with lingering images that lulled the listeners into calm wonder. Some stories were humorous, light tales of animals who tricked one another, or fables of clever peasants who outwitted the rich. These, too, were told gently, with laughter that was not sharp but mellow. The storyteller would pause, smile, let the audience lean forward in curiosity, and then deliver the ending softly, so that amusement rippled through the group like a wave across water. The joy of these stories was not only in the words, but in the shared silence that followed, in the space they created for imagination and peace. Festivals added another layer of leisure, though even these were experienced with balance. Temples held processions for the gods, with priests chanting and carrying statues, but in the villages, the people celebrated in their own quiet ways. Families prepared special meals, lighting extra lamps in their homes. Neighbours visited, bringing small offerings of bread, beer, or dried figs. In some places, music was played and dancing began, but the dancing was slow, circular, rhythmic. Feet shuffled gently upon the earth, hands clapped softly in time with the drum. Laughter rose, but it was never piercing. It was warm, like the glow of the lamps. Children painted their faces with lines of bright colour, giggling and showing one another, then grew tired, yawning, curling up near their parents. The festival was joy, but it was joy expressed in harmony, not chaos. Nature itself was one of Egypt's greatest forms of leisure, fun. To sit by the Nile at dusk, watching the water shimmer, was a form of entertainment more calming than any performance. Families walked slowly along the riverbank, their feet pressing into the cool sand. They paused to watch the birds dip into the water, the fish leap for insects, the sun sink behind palm trees. Couples sat together quietly, speaking little, listening to the hum of the evening. Children skipped stones across the surface, counting the ripples with laughter. Fishermen who had finished their work often remained by the water, not to labour, but simply to breathe, to let the river's stillness wash over them. At night, when the skies of Egypt revealed countless stars, people found entertainment simply by looking upward. They lay on mats in courtyards, pointing out constellations, whispering stories of the gods connected to the stars. They watched the slow rise of the moon, felt the night breeze, and let themselves drift into dreams even before sleep claimed them. This stargazing, quiet and timeless, was leisure as deep as meditation. Animals, too, played their part in leisure. Cats, sacred and beloved, were companions that soothed their owners. Their soft purring was a sound of peace, a gentle rhythm against the still air. Children stroked them, adults admired them, and even priests honoured them. Dogs wagged their tails and played with children in courtyards. Birds in cages sang at dawn, their high, delicate notes filling the silence with gentle sound. People watched them, fed them, and found comfort simply in their presence. Entertainment did not need to be elaborate. Sometimes it was nothing more than watching a kitten chase its tail, or listening to a bird trill, or smiling as a dog dozed in the shade. Even work and leisure sometimes blended. Women weaving linen might hum softly to themselves, turning their labour into rhythm. Men carving wood toys for children did so with care, finding joy in shaping something simple. Scribes, after their day of copying texts, sometimes wrote poems or riddles for fun, sharing them with friends in low laughter. The line between duty and entertainment was never rigid, for Egyptians knew that peace could be found in every action if done with balance and calm. So, entertainment in ancient Egypt was not spectacle, not frenzy, not distraction. It was harmony. It was the gentle plucking of harp strings at twilight. It was the patient movement of senet pieces across a painted board. It was the slow telling of stories beneath the stars. It was the laughter of children playing with reed boats by the Nile. It was the quiet dance of neighbours during a festival. It was the purring of a cat, the song of a bird, the silence of the river flowing endlessly on. Through these gentle entertainments, Egyptians reminded themselves that joy does not need noise. Happiness does not require rush. Leisure is found in stillness, in rhythm, in balance, in togetherness. Their lives were rich not because of excess, but because of the simple, calming pleasures that filled their evenings and their nights. In this way, entertainment was not separate from the rest of life. It was woven into it, as natural and steady as the Nile itself. And so, as another night fell over ancient Egypt, families gathered in courtyards, musicians played softly, children drifted into dreams, and elders told their stories by the fading light. The hours slipped away not with excitement, but with peace, not with clamour, but with comfort, until one by one, all eyes closed, and sleep carried them gently into another day. The story of the pharaohs, of their palaces and temples, of their rituals and beliefs, is not one that ends in noise. It is a story that, much like the Nile itself, flows without hurry, winding gently from beginning to end. As we reach the close of this long journey, it is worth pausing, to breathe slowly, to look back across the quiet lands of Egypt, and to let the lessons of calmness and time sink into the heart. Life in ancient Egypt was not measured in hours, nor in the rush of days. It was measured in cycles, in the rising of the sun and its setting, in the flooding of the Nile and its retreat, in the planting and the harvest, in birth and in death. Everything moved in a circle, always returning, always balanced. And the pharaohs, though mighty rulers, were part of this same rhythm. They were born, they reigned, they died, and they joined the endless procession of ancestors, becoming as eternal as the stars above the desert. To reflect on the lives of these pharaohs is to reflect on time itself. Their tombs still stand vast and silent, not speaking in words but whispering in stone. The pyramids rise slowly against the horizon, unmoving for thousands of years. Temples line the banks of the Nile, their pillars worn but still steady, their walls carrying inscriptions that echo prayers of ages past. These monuments are not loud, they are not rushed, they wait patiently beneath the sun and the stars, as if time itself has slowed down in their presence. The Egyptians believed that the soul was eternal, that death was not an end but a passage, and in a way their entire civilization seems to have embraced this thought. Nothing was hurried because nothing was lost. What was gone returned in another form. The crops that were harvested grew again after the flood. The sun that sank in the west rose again in the east. The spirit that departed returned in eternity. This timeless calm shaped the way they lived, the way they prayed, and the way they found peace even in the shadow of death. As the night deepens, one can imagine standing on the banks of the Nile in ancient times. The river flows quietly, the stars shimmer above, and the desert air is cool. In the distance, the outline of a pyramid rises like a mountain, dark against the sky. There is no sound of hurry, no rush of voices, only the eternal hush of water and wind. This was the backdrop to Egyptian life, and it is the backdrop to their reflections. The pharaohs themselves, though clothed in gold, though worshipped as gods, shared the same destiny as their people. They too sought eternal peace. They too built tombs not out of pride but out of preparation. They filled them with food, with treasures, with carvings of daily life, because to them the afterlife was not foreign. It was a continuation, a gentle step into another world where the same rhythms would flow, where the Nile would shine as a river of stars, where the fields would be forever green, and where the soul would rest in balance. And so, as we reflect, the story of Egypt becomes less about grandeur and more about calmness. Yes, the pyramids are tall, the temples vast, the statues immense, but what they communicate is not noise but stillness. They remind us that greatness can be steady, that eternity can be quiet, that the truest power is not in haste but in patience. In this final calm, we see the people of Egypt gathered once more. A family sits together in the courtyard, the oil lamp flickers, and the children grow drowsy as their grandmother tells a story of Osiris. The father leans back, listening with half-closed eyes. The mother hums softly as she weaves. Outside, the night is vast, and the stars keep their eternal watch. There is no rush to end the story. There is no rush for sleep to come. It arrives gently, as everything in Egypt does. The pharaoh, too, sits in his palace, gazing out at the Nile. He has priests to guide him, servants to attend him, armies to obey him. Yet in this moment, he is simply a man, looking at the river that has always flowed, and will always flow. He breathes slowly, knowing that his reign, too, is only one part of a much greater circle. His calm is the same calm his people feel. He is not above it, he is within it. Time in Egypt does not end, it lingers. The pharaohs pass, dynasties fall, new rulers rise, but the Nile continues, the pyramids stand, the stars shine, the calm remains. And as we close this story, we find that the gift of Egypt is not its gold, nor its power, but its stillness. The reminder that life can be lived slowly, fully, gently. In the quiet of this reflection, as sleep draws near, imagine once more the vast desert, the endless stars, the flowing river. Imagine the temples glowing faintly with the last of their lamps. Imagine the soft plucking of a harp in the distance. Imagine the cool sand beneath your feet, the steady breeze upon your skin, the eternal patience of the pyramids on the horizon. This is timeless calm. This is Egypt's gift. gift. And now, as the story fades, let your breath slow, let your thoughts drift, let your body sink into rest. Just as the Egyptians found peace in the eternal rhythm of life and death, so too may you find peace in this moment. No rush, no worry, only stillness, only balance, only calm. The Nile flows, the stars shine, the pyramids wait, and you too may rest.